Since the Ron Weasley video, I've gotten more requests to do the life of Remus Lupin than anything else, so let's get down to it. He's one of the most interesting characters in the series in my opinion, and David Thewlis, who played Lupin in the films, only made me like him more. J.K. Rowling has released a lot of new information on his character, and it's honestly one of my favorite character expansions that she's done so far. I covered the very basics of his character in my Marauders video, but there's so much more to his character that I'm going to explore in this video. I know that this character is near and dear to JK's heart, and she even said that he's one of her favorite characters in the whole Potter series. She's even said, and huge spoiler right here, that writing this expansion actually brought her to tears because she was so sad that she killed his character. In this video, I'm going to explain Remus Lupin's life from his birth to his death, and I'm also going to see how the films differ from the books. Before we do that, however, I'd like to take a moment to show how brilliant JK is once again for bringing the real world into the Potter series. JK wrote Remus's character and the werewolf illness as a metaphor for HIV and AIDS. She said that just like in the real world, in the wizarding world they're prone to hysteria and prejudice, and she got to explore that with Remus's character. I think the way JK bridges the real world to the wizarding world is just so brilliant, especially when it's about something as controversial as HIV and AIDS. Okay, now let's get the video started. Remus John Lupin was born on March 10th, 1960, but before we dive into his life, let's look at his heritage. Remus was born to Lyle Lupin, who was a wizard, and Hope Howell, who was a muggle. Lyle was a very clever, rather shy young man, who by the time he was 30 had become a world-renowned authority on non-human spiritus apparitions, also known as a non-being or a type of magical spirit created out of human emotions. These include poltergeists, boggarts, and other strange creatures that, while sometimes ghost-like in appearance and behavior, have never truly been alive and remain something of a mystery even to the wizarding world. While on a trip for work, Lyle went into a dense Welsh forest looking for a vicious boggart, and while there, he came across his future wife. Hope Howell, a beautiful muggle girl, had taken an ill-advised walk through what she believed to be a normal forest. Boggarts and poltergeists may be sensed by muggles, and Hope, a very imaginative and sensitive person, had become convinced that something was watching her from between the dark trees. Eventually, her imagination became so overactive that the boggart assumed the form of a large, evil-looking man bearing down on her with a snarl and outstretched hands. Hearing Hope scream, Lyle came sprinting through the trees, causing the apparition to shrink into a mushroom with one wave of his wand. Very confused, Hope thought that Lyle had driven her would-be attacker away. Lyle told her it was alright and said that it was just a boggart, but noticing how very beautiful she was, Lyle made the wise decision to not talk about boggarts anymore, but instead agreed that the man had been very big and very scary, and that the only sensible thing to do was for him to walk her home to protect her. The young couple fell in love, and not even Lyle's shamefaced admission some months later that Hope had never really been in danger and that he was a wizard changed how much she liked him. To Lyle's delight, Hope accepted his proposal of marriage, and she threw herself into planning the wedding, complete with a boggart-topped cake. 1 year after getting married, they had their first and only child, Remus John Lupin. He was a happy, healthy boy, and he showed early signs of magic, and both parents imagined that he would follow in his father's footsteps, attending Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. By the time Remus was 4 years old, the amount of dark magical activity across the country was increasing steadily. While few yet knew what lay behind the mounting attacks and sightings, Lord Voldemort's first ascent to power was in progress, and Death Eaters recruited all kinds of dark creatures to join them in their quest to overthrow the Ministry of Magic. The ministry recruited people that knew a lot about dark creatures, even those as minor as boggarts and poltergeists, to help them understand and contain the threat. Lyle was among those asked to join the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, which he did gladly. It was here that Lyle came face to face with a werewolf named Fenrir Greyback, who had been brought in for questioning about the death of 2 muggle children. The werewolf registry was badly maintained. Werewolves were so shunned by the Wizarding Society that they generally avoided contact with other people. They lived in self-described packs, and did all they could to avoid being registered. Greyback, whom the ministry did not know to be a werewolf, claimed to be nothing more than a muggle tramp who was utterly amazed at finding himself in a room full of wizards, and horrified by the talk of the poor dead children. Greyback's filthy clothing and lack of a wand were sufficient to persuade 2 overworked and ignorant members of the questioning committee, and they believed he was telling the truth, but Lyle was not so easily fooled. He recognized certain telltale signs in Greyback's appearance and behavior, and he told the committee that Greyback ought to be kept in detention until the next full moon, that was a mere 24 hours later. Greyback sat in silence while Lyle was laughed at by his fellow committee members, who told him to stick to Welsh boggarts because that was all he was good for. Lyle, generally a mild-mannered man, grew angry. He described werewolves as being soulless and evil and deserving nothing but death. The committee ordered the angry Lyle out of the room. The head of the committee apologized to the Muggle tramp, and Greyback was released. The wizard who escorted Greyback out intended to place a memory charm upon him so he would not remember being in the ministry. However, before he had the chance to do so, he was overpowered by Greyback and 2 accomplices who had been lurking at the entrance, and the 3 werewolves escaped. Greyback lost no time in sharing with his friends how Lyle Lupin had described their kind. Their revenge on the wizard who thought werewolves deserved nothing but death would be swift and terrible. Shortly before Remus Lupin's 5th birthday, as he slept peacefully in his bed, Fenrir Greyback forced open the boy's window and attacked him. Lyle reached the bedroom in time to save his son's life, driving Greyback out of the house with a number of powerful curses. However, henceforth, Remus would be a fully fledged werewolf. Lyle never forgave himself for the words he had spoken in front of Greyback. Soulless, evil, deserving nothing but death. He had stated the stereotypical view of werewolves in his community, but for Lyle, his son was what he had always been, lovable and clever. But when the full moon came, Remus suffered an excruciating transformation and became a danger to everyone around him. For many years, Lyle kept the truth about the attack, including the identity of the attacker, from his son, fearing what Remus's reaction would be. Lyle did all he could to find a cure, but neither potions nor spells could help his son. From this time on, the family's lives were taken over with the need to hide Remus's condition. They uprooted themselves from village to town, leaving the instant rumors of the boy's odd behavior started. Fellow witches and wizards noticed how peaky Remus would become as the full moon approached, not to mention his monthly disappearances. Remus was not allowed to play with other children, his parents fearing that he would let slip his condition. Because of this, even with such loving parents, he was a very lonely boy. While Remus was small, his containment during his transformation was not difficult. A locked room and plenty of silencing spells usually sufficed. However, as he grew, so did his wolfish self, and by the time he was 10 years old, he was capable of pounding down doors and smashing windows. Ever more powerful spells were needed to contain him, and both Hope and Lyle grew thin with worry and fear. When he transformed, it was excruciating for Remus, and because he was away from humans, which naturally as a werewolf he needed to go after and bite, he instead bit and scratched himself, leaving his human self scarred all over. Lyle and Hope adored their son, but they knew that their community, who were already terrified of the dark activity going on around them, would not want an uncontrolled werewolf near them. The hopes that they had once had for their son seemed in ruins, and Lyle educated Remus at home, certain that he would never be able to set foot in school. Shortly before Remus's 11th birthday, however, Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts, arrived uninvited on the Lupin's doorstep. Flustered and frightened, Lyle and Hope tried to block his entrance, but somehow, 5 minutes later, Dumbledore was sitting at the fireside eating crumpets and playing a game with Remus. Dumbledore explained to the Lupins that he knew what had happened to their son. Greyback had boasted of what he had done, and Dumbledore had spies among the dark creatures. To the parents' shock, Dumbledore told the Lupins that he saw no reason why Remus should not come to school, and he described the arrangements that he had made to give the boy a safe and secure place for his transformations. Due to the widespread prejudice around werewolves, however, Dumbledore agreed that for Remus's own sake, his condition should not be broadcasted. Dumbledore explained that once a month, he would go to a secure and comfortable house in the village of Hogsmeade, the town right next to Hogwarts, and that both Remus and the house would be guarded by many spells. He then explained how the house could only be reached through an underground passage from the Hogwarts grounds, and that the entrance to the tunnel was guarded by a tree called the Whomping Willow, specifically grown for this purpose. This way he could get there quickly and secretively, and transform in peace. Remus's excitement was beyond anything he had ever known before. It was the dream of his life to meet other children, and have, for the first time, friends and playmates. When Remus went to school, the Sorting Hat put him in Gryffindor, and he quickly became friends with 2 confident and rebellious boys, James Potter and Sirius Black. James and Sirius were attracted to Remus's quiet sense of humor, and most of all his kindness, which they valued, even if they did not always possess it themselves. Remus, always the underdog's friend, was kind to a short and rather slow kid named Peter Pettigrew, a fellow Gryffindor who James and Sirius might not have thought worthy of their attention without Remus's persuasion. Soon, these 4 became inseparable. Remus did just as Dumbledore had planned. Once a month, he was escorted to the tunnel leading to the house, and he went through his transformation there. The villagers of Hogsmeade heard his transformation every month, but they thought the noises they were hearing were violent spirits. Because of this, the house was dubbed the Shrieking Shack, and from then on was said to be haunted, something that Dumbledore encouraged so that people would not get suspicious, and it was also a good way to keep people away from the shack, the villagers being too scared to approach it. Because the boys were inseparable, James, Sirius, and Peter wondered where their friend went every month. Remus made up all sorts of stories and excuses, terrified that his friends would desert him if they knew what he really was. Because now, having friends, Lupin was happier than he had ever been in his life. Eventually, however, the three boys put together that Remus was a werewolf, and Remus was so happy when his friends did not desert him as he thought they would. His three friends went on to make Lupin's transformations not only bearable, but the best times of his life. Because they could not keep him company as humans, they decided to keep him company as animals. James, Sirius, and Peter turned into animagi. And yes, that's how you pronounce animagus. Rowling said that it's pronounced with a J instead of a G, but the films got it wrong. By transforming into animagi, they could turn back and forth between animal and human at will, and because werewolves were only a danger to people, they could be around Lupin while in their animal forms. James turned into a stag, Sirius turned into a black dog, and Peter turned into a rat. During the full moon, they would stay out all night and hang out in the Shrieking Shack. They gave each other nicknames. Remus was Mooney, James was Prongs, Sirius was Padfoot, and Peter was Wormtail, and they gave their group the nickname, the Marauders. Lupin discovered that under their influence, he became less dangerous, and while his body was still wolfish, his mind seemed to become less so while in the company of his friends. As time went on, they decided to leave the shack during their nights out, and here, there were many near misses of Lupin losing control, but after it happened, their immature selves laughed about it. Because of the knowledge they gained while roaming the grounds, the four made the Marauders map, which showed the entire school grounds in Hogsmeade, and showed where every person there was.
So you mean this map shows
Everyone.
everyone?
Everyone. Where they are, what they're doing, every minute of every day.
Brilliant!
The Marauders were sworn enemies of Severus Snape, a Slytherin boy in their year. Just like James, Sirius, and Peter, Snape was very curious to find out where Lupin went every month. And one day, Sirius told Snape about the tunnel to the Shrieking Shack, saying that if he went down there, he would find out the truth. Snape followed the tunnel and was almost mauled by Lupin, but to Remus's absolute relief, Snape was saved by James before Lupin got the chance. Now knowing what Lupin was, Snape was ordered by Dumbledore to keep Remus's secret to himself. Remus functioned as the conscience of their group, but it was an occasionally faulty conscience. He did not approve of James and Sirius's relentless bullying of Severus Snape, but he loved James and Sirius so much, and was so grateful for their acceptance, that he did not always stand up to them as much as he knew he should have. Though he never participated in the bullying, one of his biggest regrets when he was older was never stopping James and Sirius from bullying others. In his 5th year, Lupin was made a prefect, Dumbledore giving him this position, hoping that he could keep his friends in check. Lupin, however, was not appointed head boy in his 7th year, as James took that position after maturing a great deal over the years. During their final years at Hogwarts, Remus also became close to James's girlfriend, Lily Evans. She was very kind to Remus despite knowing what he was, and he always valued and held their friendship close to his heart. By the time Lupin finished school, Lord Voldemort had almost completed his quest for power, and the only thing that stood between him and his ultimate goal was the small organization called the Order of the Phoenix, a group run by Albus Dumbledore. Lupin joined right after finishing school, and as did his 4 best friends, James, Sirius, Peter, and Lily. During their time in the Order, Remus was very happy for James and Lily when they got married, and Remus attended their wedding. He was even more thrilled for the two of them when they had their son, who they named Harry. However, Remus's happiness soon vanished when James and Lily were murdered at the hands of Lord Voldemort himself. This was one of the most traumatic events in Remus's already troubled life, as his friends meant much more to him than the average person, because he had long since accepted the fact that most people would treat him as untouchable and that there was no possibility of marrying or having children for him. His friends were all he had. Even worse, within 24 hours, he had also lost his 2 other best friends. Remus was in the north of the country on Order of the Phoenix business when he heard the horrible news that Sirius had murdered Peter, and that Sirius was now in Azkaban, a traitor to the Order and to Lily and James, giving up vital information to Voldemort that led to their deaths. There was light in all this tragedy, however, when Lily and James's son Harry survived and caused Voldemort's downfall. But while this was a source of celebration and happiness to the rest of the Wizarding World, Remus had nothing but loneliness and unhappiness to look forward to. All of his friends now gone. James murdered, Lily murdered, Peter murdered, and Sirius in Azkaban. And on top of that, with the Order disbanded, his previous comrades returned to busy lives with their families, a life Remus knew he could never have. Around this time, his mother Hope died as well, and though his father Lyle was always delighted to see his son, Remus refused to endanger his father's peaceful existence by returning to live with them. Remus lived a hand-to-mouth existence, taking jobs that were far below his level of ability, always knowing that he would have to leave them before his pattern of growing sick once a month at the full moon was noticed by his workmates. One development in the Wizarding World gave Remus hope again, however, the discovery of the Wolfsbane potion. While this did not prevent him from turning into a werewolf every month, it restricted his transformation to that of an ordinary and sleepy wolf. It had always been Remus's worst fear that he would kill someone while in his werewolf state, but with the Wolfsbane potion, this was no longer a problem. However, the potion was very complex, and the ingredients to make it were very expensive. Remus had no chance to sample it without admitting what he was, and so he continued with his lonely existence. Once again, Albus Dumbledore changed the course of Remus's life when he tracked him down to a very awful and rundown cottage. Delighted to see the headmaster, Remus was amazed when Dumbledore offered him the post of Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. He was only persuaded to accept, however, when Dumbledore explained that there would be a limitless supply of Wolfsbane potion, courtesy of the potions master and the Marauder's former rival, Severus Snape. Right before starting his new job, Remus got the news that his old friend Sirius Black had escaped from Azkaban. Remus had his suspicions of how he did it, knowing that he was an animagus, but he did not voice his concerns, especially not to Dumbledore, who had given him so much. His desperate desire to belong and to be liked meant that he was not as brave nor as honest as he ought to have been. Remus, being very poor, took the Hogwarts Express with the students, and he slept in the compartment that Harry, Ron, and Hermione decided to sit in. While in the train, Dementors boarded looking for Lupin's old friend, and Lupin saved Harry from the Dementors by casting a Patronus charm. After the series ended, JK gave us some insight into his Patronus. His Patronus took the form of a wolf, an ordinary wolf, not a werewolf. But on the train, he hid this fact by producing his Patronus without its wolf form. Wolves are family-oriented and non-aggressive, but Remus disliked the form his Patronus took because it was a constant reminder of his affliction. Everything wolfish disgusted him. He often hid his Patronus form, especially when others were watching. When Harry woke up, Remus saw so much of James in him, which made his heart leap, but also drop at the same time. He gave Harry and the others chocolate to help them after the Dementor attack, something that Madame Pomfrey was very impressed with, saying that she was glad they finally had a Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher who knew his stuff. At Hogwarts, Remus revealed himself to be a gifted teacher with a rare flair for his own subject and profound understanding of his pupils. Once again, just like with Pettigrew, Remus was drawn to the underdog, and both Neville Longbottom and Harry Potter benefited from his wisdom and kindness. In his first class with the third-year Gryffindors, Remus stood up to Snape when he started bullying Neville, possibly wanting to make up for not standing up to his old friends when they bullied. During that first lesson, he had the class study a boggart, the same thing that his father Lyle was an expert in, and Remus had heard about since he was a small boy. While at school, many Slytherins sneered at Remus for his shabby clothes and poor appearance, and Malfoy even said loudly that he dressed like their old house elf, though Lupin seemed unbothered by this. Remus was eventually reunited with the map that he and his friends had made. The books and the movies differ a great deal with this part of the story. While in the movies, Harry was out of bed during the night. In the books, this happened during the day. Snape summoned Lupin to his office, and Snape asked him whether the parchment he had caught Harry with was dark magic, and recognizing it, Remus said it was a product from a joke shop. At that exact moment, Ron burst in, coming from Hogsmeade, backing up the claim and saying that he had got it from the joke shop there. After escorting the two boys from Snape's office, Remus told them that he knew what the map was and was disappointed that they did not turn it in. He scolded Harry, much to their surprise, and he confiscated the map, knowing it would be too dangerous for Harry to go through the secret passageways that he knew Sirius knew like the back of his hand. Remus connected very deeply with Harry, who reminded him so much of his old friend. At the beginning of term, he invited Harry for tea where the two headed off, their conversation starting with the Grindylow in Lupin's office, and the Grindylow really freaked Harry out. Later on during the school year, Lupin helped Harry learn the Patronus charm because the Dementors affected him so much, and he was shocked at how fast Harry picked it up. Remus of course had to take time off when he transformed, and while he was gone, Snape took over his class. Snape, being petty towards Lupin for their Hogwarts years, decided to teach the classes about werewolves, hoping that someone would pick up on the fact that Lupin was one himself. Hermione was of course the only one who realized this, however, but she liked Lupin so much that she kept it to herself. For his third year's end of term exam, Lupin had compiled the most unusual final. It was a sort of obstacle course outside in the sun. First they had to wade across a deep paddling pool containing Grindylows, then cross a series of potholes full of redcaps, then squish their way across a patch of marsh while ignoring misleading directions from a hinky punk, and finally had to climb into an old trunk and battle a new boggart. He was once again impressed with Harry, and after Harry finished, he told him that he got full marks. Now having the Marauder's map, Lupin was shocked to see his old friend, Peter Pettigrew, on the map, and later he saw Sirius Black, both of whom were in the Shrieking Shack with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. When he went there, he found out the truth, that Sirius was innocent and framed, and that Peter never died. He merely turned into his animagus form and stayed that way for the past 13 years, being Ron's pet. Finding out that Peter was the one who betrayed Lily and James, he and Sirius went to kill him, but Harry stopped them, saying that they should take him to the castle instead. Things went wrong, however, when Remus had forgotten to take his Wolfsbane potion, and he transformed into a werewolf, allowing for Peter Pettigrew to escape. While transformed, Lupin attacked Harry and Hermione, but to Lupin's great relief, he was stopped by the Hippogriff Buckbeak, and he spent the rest of the night deep in the Forbidden Forest until his werewolf form wore off. Despite Remus being very respectful, gracious, and polite to Snape, Snape's resentment of the former Marauder was still very prevalent, and he made sure that it was widely known what the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher was. Remus felt obligated to resign to take the strain off of Dumbledore after he got hundreds of letters from nasty parents, and Lupin departed from Hogwarts once more. Before leaving, Harry begged Lupin to stay, but Remus shook his head, saying that he could not do that. He did, however, return the Marauder's map to Harry, along with his invisibility cloak, which he had left in the Shrieking Shack that night, and he told Harry that they would meet again soon. When Voldemort returned, the old resistance that was the Order of the Phoenix regrouped, and Remus was once again a key member. This time, the group included an Auror who had been too young to belong to the Order during its first incarnation. Clever, brave, and funny, Nymphadora Tonks was a protege of Alistair Mad-Eye Moody. Remus, so often melancholy and lonely, was first amused, then impressed, then seriously smitten by the young witch. Rowling shed some light past the books on his feelings for Tonks and how he felt behind the scenes of the Order of the Phoenix. She stated that Remus had never fallen in love before, mainly because he didn't allow himself to. Scared of these feelings for Nymphadora, all he wanted to do was go off to a new place and find a new job, so he did not have to endure the pain of watching Tonks fall in love with a handsome young wizard in the Order office, which was what he expected to happen. However, this was war. The Order needed both of them, and nobody knew what the next day would bring. Remus felt justified in remaining exactly where he was, keeping his feelings to himself, but rejoicing secretly every time somebody paired him with Tonks on some overnight mission. It had never occurred to Remus that Tonks could return his feelings, because he had become so used to considering himself unclean and unworthy. Lupin was happy to have his old friend Sirius back, who lived at the Order's headquarters in Grimmauld Place. It reminded him of the old days, which were fun to reminisce on. The summer before Harry's 5th year, Lupin was reunited with Harry when he and a group of other Order members, including Tonks, escorted him from Privet Drive to Grimmauld Place. Later on during that school year, Harry reached out to Lupin and Sirius to ask about his father after seeing a memory of him bullying Snape during their school years. And here, Lupin admitted that he should have put a stop to Sirius and James's bullying, but he assured Harry that James was a good person and that he grew out of the days when he was a bully. Going back to Rowling's expansion of Remus and Tonks' relationship past the books, one night when they lay in hiding outside a known Death Eater's house, after a year of increasingly warm friendship, Tonks made an idle remark about one of their fellow Order members. She said to Lupin, referring to Sirius, "He's still handsome, isn't he? Even after Azkaban?" Before he could stop himself, Lupin replied bitterly that he supposed that she had fallen for his old friend, saying that Sirius had always gotten the women. At this, Tonks became suddenly angry and said, "You'd know perfectly well who I've fallen for if you weren't too busy feeling sorry for yourself to notice." Remus's immediate response to this was happiness he had never experienced in his life, but this was extinguished almost at once by a sense of crushing duty. He had always known that he could not marry and run the risk of passing on his painful, shameful condition. He therefore pretended not to understand Tonks, though this did not fool her at all. Wiser than Remus, she was sure that he loved her, but that he was refusing to admit it out of mistaken nobility. Lupin went on to avoid any further excursions with her, barely talked to her, and started volunteering for the most dangerous missions. Tonks became desperately unhappy, convinced not only that the man she loved would never willingly spend time with her again, but also that he might walk to his death rather than admit his feelings. At the end of the year, Lupin had yet another bit of tragedy befall him during the battle in the Department of Mysteries. He watched as Sirius was struck down by Bellatrix, Lupin losing yet another one of his best friends. Lupin wanted to fall apart at his core, but seeing Harry, he knew he could not do this. Instead, he held a screaming and crying Harry back, knowing that he had to be strong for his best friend's child. He was all Harry had now that his father, mother, and godfather were all gone. The Order took a heavy loss that night, but ultimately they won the battle. Tonks continued to watch in despair as Remus volunteered to spy for the Order. He went on one mission where he left to live among fellow werewolves to try and persuade them to Dumbledore's side. In doing this, he was exposing himself to the possibility of seeing the werewolf that changed his life forever, Fenrir Greyback. Fortunately, he did not run into him, at least not yet. Remus came out of hiding among the werewolves to spend Christmas at the Burrow, and when Harry told him and Arthur about Snape working with Malfoy, Remus stood up for Snape despite the fact that he was the one that let slip that he was a werewolf. He mostly did this in honor of Dumbledore, however.
It comes down to whether or not you trust Dumbledore's judgment. Dumbledore trusts Snape, therefore I do.
During his time back, Remus ensured that he did not run into Tonks, still terrified of his feelings for her. Remus later came face to face with both Greyback and Tonks at Hogwarts just a few months later, however, when the Order clashed with Death Eaters within the castle. During the battle, Remus lost yet another person that he loved, Albus Dumbledore. He screamed and lost control hearing this awful news. Dumbledore had been adored by every member of the Order of the Phoenix, but to Remus, he had represented the sort of kindness, tolerance, and understanding that he had received from nobody else in the world outside his parents and his 4 best friends. Dumbledore had been the only person to ever offer him a position within the normal wizarding society, and the only person to make him feel accepted. In the aftermath of the bloody battle, inspired by Fleur Delacour's claim of her enduring love for Bill Weasley even after being mauled by Greyback that night, Tonks made a brave and public announcement of her feelings for Remus, and he was forced to admit the strength of his love for her in front of everyone. Everyone there told him that he was being stupid, and not too long after that, Remus and Tonks got married. It was a quiet wedding in the north of Scotland, with witnesses taken from the local wizarding tavern. Lupin's continued fear that the stigma attached to him would infect his wife as well wanted no witnesses that knew what he truly was, and this fear continued even after they were married. Remus went from extremely happy that he was married to the woman of his dreams, to scared of what he might have brought upon her, and later to his horror, their unborn child, Tonks getting pregnant only weeks after they were married. Not too long after that, Lupin and Tonks participated in the Battle of Seven Potters, where they once again transported Harry from Privet Drive to a safe house. With this time they used Polyjuice Potion on 6 Order members so no one would know which one was the real Harry. Remus was paired with George Weasley, and during their ascent, they flew into a trap, being met by many Death Eaters. One of them was Severus Snape, whose spell hit George in the ear. Lupin wanted to get Snape back for this, but was unable to because he needed all of his strength to keep George on the broom, as he lost a dangerous amount of blood. He got George back to the Burrow to be cleaned up, though George's ear was permanently lost. Upon arrival, Remus questioned Harry to prove that he was the real one, asking him about the first time Harry entered his office for tea.
What creature sat in the corner the first time Harry Potter visited my office in Hogwarts?
What do you mean?
What creature?
Grindylow!
Remus was angry, especially about Snape, but little did he know, Snape actually tried to save his life. When Snape saw that one of the Death Eaters was about to hit and presumably kill Lupin, Snape sent his spell, trying to cut off the Death Eater's hand but missed, instead hitting George's ear. Lupin was very anxious about the late arrival of his wife, and when she finally arrived, he could not have been happier to see her and to know that she and their unborn baby were safe. Lupin and the others got bad news shortly after that, however, when they discovered that Mad-Eye Moody had been killed. Lupin was there to comfort Nymphadora, as she was the protege of the now fallen Order. They discussed who could have betrayed them, because the Death Eaters knew that they were coming, but Harry interjected, saying that he trusted everyone part of the mission with his life. To this, Remus responded, saying that he should be cautious, seeing as Harry's father was killed because he put trust in the wrong friend. During the summer, Remus and Tonks went to the Burrow for Harry's birthday, but when they got word that the Minister for Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour, was coming, Remus said that they should not be there and apologized to Harry before grabbing Tonks' wrist and pulling her away. They visited the Burrow again, this time for Bill and Fleur's wedding. Things took a turn for the worse, however, when Death Eaters arrived. Lupin and Tonks fought the Death Eaters off to ensure that Harry, Ron, and Hermione could escape. In the days to come, Lupin thought more and more about his unborn son and his relationship with Nymphadora. Every fear he had came to the surface, and he was convinced that he had passed on his condition to an innocent child, and thought he had condemned Tonks to the same life as his parents, forever moving around, unable to settle, having to hide their increasingly violent child from sight. Full of remorse and self-shame, Remus fled, leaving a devastated and pregnant Nymphadora to move in with her parents. Meanwhile, Remus sought out Harry and offered to accompany him on whatever death-defying adventure awaited. He tracked the trio down to Grimmauld Place and offered his help, but to his shock and displeasure, the 17-year-old Harry not only declined his offer, but became angry and insulting. He told his ex-teacher that he was acting selfishly and irresponsibly. He called him a coward and compared Remus to his own father James, saying that he would be ashamed of him if Lupin was his father. Remus responded by slamming Harry back violently and stormed out of the house. He took refuge in the corner of the leaky cauldron and drank his troubles away, fuming as he did so. However, after a few hours of reflection, Remus was forced to accept that his ex-pupil had just taught him a valuable lesson. Remus reflected that James and Lily had stuck with Harry until their own deaths, fighting the Dark Lord as they did so. And his own parents, Lyle and Hope, had sacrificed their peace and security to keep their family together. Bitterly ashamed, Remus left the inn and returned to his wife, where he begged for her forgiveness. He assured her that no matter what, he would never leave her again. For the rest of Tonks' pregnancy, Remus avoided any missions for the Order and made it his first priority to protect his wife and his unborn child. Lupin later appeared on the radio broadcast called Potter Watch under the codename Romulus and said that he knew Harry was alive, and said directly to Harry if he was listening that they were all with him in spirit, and said to follow his instincts, which are good and nearly always right. Not long after that, Tonks gave birth to her and Remus's son, Edward Remus Lupin, or Teddy for short. To both parents' relief and delight, he showed no sign of being a werewolf when he was born. Remus thought he looked like Nymphadora, but Nymphadora thought he looked like Remus. On the night of Teddy's birth, Remus briefly left so he could find Harry for the first time since their angry confrontation. Here, he asked Harry to be Teddy's godfather, feeling nothing but forgiveness and gratitude toward the person who sent him home to his family. Both Remus and Tonks returned to Hogwarts for the final battle against Voldemort and his Death Eaters, leaving their baby son with his grandmother. The couple knew that if Voldemort won this battle, their family was sure to be eliminated, as both were notorious members of the Order, and Tonks was a marked woman in the eyes of her Death Eater aunt, Bellatrix Lestrange. Lupin fought skillfully and bravely out of many tight corners and survived numerous encounters with Death Eaters. However, Remus met his end at the hands of Antoine Dolohov, one of the longest serving, most devoted, and sadistic of all Voldemort's Death Eaters. Lupin was no longer in prime fighting condition when he rushed to join the fight. Months of inactivity, using mostly spells of concealment and protection, had weakened his dueling capabilities, and when he ran up against the dueler of Dolohov's skill, now battle-hardened after months of killing and maiming, Remus's reactions were too slow. The love of Remus's life also met her end that night, orphaning their baby boy. Both were ready to make this sacrifice, however, knowing that if they did not win this battle, their son would not have lived past his infant years. They were proud to give their lives for this reason, giving their son a future. In the afterlife, Lupin was joined by his best friends, James, Sirius, and Lily, as they talked to Harry before he sacrificed himself.
And Remus, your son.
Others will tell him what his mother and father died for. One day, he'll understand.
They walked with him as Harry allowed himself to be killed, Lupin and the others comforting him as he did so, a presence that put Harry at peace. Harry of course survived, however, and he went on to honor both Remus and Tonks by helping raise his godson. Remus was awarded Order of Merlin First Class and was the first werewolf to ever get this honor. The example of his life and death did much to lift the stigma on werewolves, making a big difference in the wizarding world for his kind. Lupin was never forgotten by anyone that knew him. A brave, kind man who did the best he could in very difficult circumstances, and who helped many more people than he ever realized. Thank you so much for watching, guys. You can follow me on social media to see more of my personal life and see more of this little dude. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook for Movie Flame updates. And I want to give a huge shout out to all my patrons listed below. If you want to be featured in the next video, plus get a bunch of other rewards, become a patron today. Again, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you press that like button and subscribe, and look out for more great videos on the way.